Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Rob Asibe, board certified family medicine physician and District 8 director on the CAP board. On this episode of the Family Docs podcast, we conclude our 2-episode series developed by the CAP and IPMA. Supported by the core partnerships through an independent educational grant from opioid analgesics REMS program companies. This 2-episode podcast amplifies the voices of individuals with lived experience navigating healthcare stigma related to opioid use, race, identity, pregnancy, and trauma. Their stories reveal systemic challenges and human truths, serving as a call to action for listeners to reflect, empathize, and act to provide compassionate care. If you haven't listened to the first episode with Joey, I strongly encourage you to go back and listen. Today, we hear again from Valery Shuman, co-founder of the Sauna Healing Collective, a nonprofit organization seeking to change the paradigm of mental health treatment, who speaks with Kshe. Faced with judgment, fear during her pregnancy, Kshe found hope in one provider's compassion. Her story is a powerful reminder that empathy in medicine can change lives. Now, let's learn more.
My name is Valery Shuman. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and a board-certified art therapist. I have been working for over 20 years with people who use drugs, people experiencing homelessness, and people with serious mental illness. And I have done a lot of research and work around stigma reduction. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today with you, Kshe, and I want to thank you for being willing to share your personal story in order to help healthcare providers see the humanity of drug users and treat them better so that everybody can be healthier.
Absolutely, I'm honored.
So if you don't mind, we can just jump right into it, except that I do want to ask you to talk a little bit about, so you're here speaking about your personal drug use history, but you are also a peer harm reduction worker and a service provider. Could you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yes, I actually have my own non-for-profit, and we serve individuals experiencing homelessness, people who use drugs, and people with serious mental illness, and sex workers. I would be remiss if I didn't mention them. I've been doing this work for 5.5 years. My specialty is direct care and street outreach, and I'm currently running a transitional pop-up shelter in a public space. It's super exciting and new territory, especially for me.
Amazing and important work. Thank you for your service. So if we could start with you sharing a brief story about how opioids came into your life.
I was actually born into opioid use. I have generational lived experience with opioid use and users. Both my parents were injection heroin users, and my father was also a drug dealer and a pimp, and my mother was one of his girls, and literally born into it, kind of how I came to be.
And when did you yourself start using them?
I was taking pills from a very young age. My mother would give them to me. She was a strong believer in medication, but I started injecting heroin at 15.
And talking to you today, we're going to talk about your experience being pregnant as a drug user. When did you become pregnant?
At 18 years old.
At 18 years old. And you were injecting opioids at that time?
Yes, I had actually had 6 overdoses in like the space of 3 or 4 weeks. My saying at that time, because I hit the streets in between 12 and 13 years old, and I really didn't have any will to live. My saying was, I'm just going to stay high till I die. I never intended to have children. That was never on my agenda or in my plans. And I had just experienced another overdose. And so I was a frequent utilizer at the ED, of course. I was homeless and using drugs and just all the things that our population face. And the ED doc came in, and he's, Kshe, if you do not stop this, you are going to die. And I'll never forget, I was sitting like at the end of the bed. And I looked at him and I said, good, what's taking so long?
How did he respond to that?
He dropped his head and then he looked at me and he goes, maybe I can change your mind. And I just looked at him because I didn't think it was possible. And he said, you're pregnant. And I was really caught off guard by that because, like I said, it was unexpected and I'd never wanted children. And in that moment, I totally was excited and knew I wanted to keep the baby.
Wow.
It was that fast.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And how was the rest of the conversation with him after that moment?
He was kind to me. I think I made him very sad. He had cried a couple of times with me, and he'd always try to talk to me about like going into shelter and stopping using drugs. And I'd been assaulted a couple times, of course. I was working at the time, and you could have a better life. And I always told him that no, I couldn't. I was kind of resigned to my fate. But he did tell me I was going to have to go cold turkey, which we now know is not proper medical advice. He was from another country. I'm not quite sure where. I don't remember. And I think they tend to have more stigmatizing ideas towards drug use, even than here. And it's super problematic here. He was kind, but you have to stop using drugs. If you want this baby, if you want to be alive, you have to stop using drugs, like right now.
It sounds like this doctor, he encountered you multiple times. He was the doctor that served you each time you?
Not each time, but I was in and out of the ED so much. I just always happened to hit his shifts, but I saw other doctors, and the other doctors, there was a female one in particular, were very not kind.
In what way?
At all. They were just like super stigmatizing. There was no compassion, no engagement. They just patch me up and send me out. They'd be like, pretty much, this is your choices. What do you expect to happen?
So dismissive.
Yes.
Not emotional. Because one of the things you noted about this ED doctor is that he emoted.
He did.
He was moved by your plight, and that seemed to have made a difference.
Yes. Yeah. No, I'm always grateful that it was him that told me, because I panicked. I was excited, but I panicked at the same time.
And so his recommendation was cold turkey, which we know could have actually led you to miscarry and lose your baby. So what did you do?
My mother had engaged in methadone services, so I was familiar with that.
So you already had some knowledge and wisdom and experience.
Yeah, like one of my key memories when we were still out in Colorado is being little and bouncing around in the lines, the methadone clinic lines, along with the other kids. So I very familiar with that. And so I really, like I said, I was absolutely scared, but also super excited. I can't say how much I wanted this baby. And he turned 25 yesterday, by the way.
Happy birthday.
Yes. But so I too, because I didn't know, thought I was going to have to quit cold turkey. And I was so overwhelmed at the thought of that, because I had a heavy habit by then. That was probably the time in my life where I was using the absolutely most drugs. So I was super scared at the thought of being sick. And then I would just happen to be a very sick pregnant person anyway. And I think it's probably coming because I didn't start injecting heroin until I was 15, but I had significant drug use from the time I was like 11 or 12. So the thought of going off of everything was scary and overwhelming.
You had no experience with that.
No.
Your friends, your tools, your coping mechanisms. And
absolutely.
Taken away.
Absolutely. But I did make my way to the methadone clinic because I talked to someone that was, I don't know if mentor is the right word, but somebody that I looked to for advice and expertise. And they're like, no, you can take methadone when you're pregnant.
Was this person also a drug user?
Yes.
That's an
street mom
feature, right?
Yes.
So one of the things that I think is important for us to help healthcare providers understand today is that we take care of each other in the drug user community, and that drug users are invested in their own health. So you sought out another drug user who knew something that could help you.
Yes, and I had no family relationships at that time. I had left home and left my family completely behind. So I went to street mom and I was panicking. And I was like, I'm pregnant and I want to keep the baby, but I don't know what to do. And I have to quit all drugs. And I was, like I said, just terrified of being sick. And she told me, you can take methadone pregnant. And I was like, I didn't believe her. But she's no, seriously. And so I went to the clinic and told them I was pregnant and they expedited me, which was nice. And that was that journey.
And how did they treat you?
And that, right? It was the first time I had access to medication-assisted recovery or recovery at all, like even thought about it. And I think they were kind to me because I was pregnant. They were also very much pushing sobriety. And like I said, I was using other substances as well. And they don't want to give you methadone if you're using other drugs. And so that can be a barrier to quit absolutely everything you're doing to be able to access this medication. And that's not really medically sound advice either. You don't have to be sober from other substances to start seeking recovery from your most problematic one.
Agreed. Did you seek out prenatal care? And if so, or if not, what were you thinking about, concerned about in terms of seeking out that care?
I, of course, had no insurance. And so I went to some woman's pregnancy help place that I thought was going to help me navigate, but it actually ended up being religious and very much keep the baby. They were like an anti-choice place, but I didn't know. But I walked in and I was like, I need signed up for insurance, I'm pregnant. They did the test and then they pulled me back for counseling. And when I got in there and realized it was like religious everywhere, I panicked, but I do know how to navigate people with heavy religious ideology because I was in foster care and one of my placements was very religious. So I knew how to play that game. But when they went to they do a urine test. And then they were sending me for labs, and that's when I panicked.
Because he
had track marks. And so I was scared, and I put off getting that confirmatory test because of it. But when they heard my story, they instantly said, you need to put the baby up for adoption. And I was crushed by that. And I was like, no, I want to keep her. And they said, you're homeless. I did disclose, I think I said something ridiculous, like I smoked marijuana. And that,
because that was the one that was the most acceptable.
yeah, and even that was not acceptable. It was 1998. Yeah, even that was not acceptable. Even if you're pregnant, I smoked cigarettes. And they're like, if you really want this child to succeed, you're going to have to place it for adoption. And they gave me all the adoption paperwork, but they did give me a counselor.
Kind of a counselor.
She was, I really don't know who or what her credentials are now, but I do know at that time she was the kindest person I had met to that date. And that was also the first time I experienced any counseling. And she maybe saved my life.
Some emotion coming up in response to someone expressing love and caring and saving you. Yeah. Did she help you find a physician that could care for you and your fetus?
I didn't disclose to her the chaotic drug use, but I'm sure she suspected.
Yeah.
But she just really, I hadn't been with any sort of parents. It was very feral at the time. And she helped me realize, because I was suicidal every day during that time, like I said, high till I die, and all that drug use was covering that up. And so when I did start to taper, because I did want a healthy baby, it was all that stuff came up, and she really helped me walk through that. And we started talking about housing options and all of that. I did have to go to the clinic, like the pregnancy clinic, for people on Medicaid insurance. And that was a really hard experience. There was no compassion to be had there. And of course, they tested me for everything.
You mean all the drugs?
Yes. And I dropped dirty for everything. And we would never use the term drop dirty now. We would say,
I was going to say, we need to talk about that language.
yes, but they're like, you came back dirty for this and this. And I remember crying and panicking, and I didn't know what they were going to. I was like, they're instantly going to take my baby. And they're like, they did say that if I was still testing positive for substances when I delivered, that they would take the baby at birth. And I was terrified.
Did that impact your decision to continue to seek care there?
Yes, it did. I started going to the library and looking up how to do at-home births. I think that everybody who works with pregnant women who use drugs needs to realize that when we hear these stories about women who like hide their pregnancy and give birth at home, which is super dangerous for mom and baby, that's why. Because we are absolutely terrified
Of raising your children.
No, when you remove a child from care, it does not give mom a reason to keep seeking recovery or keep trying to seek recovery, because I now work with women who are DCFS involved because of substance use, and it's never take the children and they get better. It actually makes them spiral further. We need to support moms, not stigmatize them.
And it sounds like your fetus was your reason for trying to pursue sobriety, for staying alive. It was the one and only reason that you had at that moment.
No, and I say it often, and I don't always think it's fair to her, but my daughter's name is Rain, and I say all the time that she is the sole reason I am alive today. She is the first thing that I ever wanted to live for. And this has not always been a straight journey, but she has always been my reason.
How does she respond to that?
She knows she is beloved, and she was in the trenches with me. So we've had our own journey, but she knows she's my reason. She knows she is the center of my world. And I think she's honored by it. I'm glad you had me, Mom. So I never lost custody of her. And I think that's important to note, because sometimes when I tell my story, I do nursing education and I don't go this in depth, but I now have 3 children.
Wow.
And they're really surprised that I have custody of my kids. And I always laugh, because to me, of course I do. And to them, of course I don't.
Did you continue to use drugs after your children were born?
I did. I did. Like I said, particularly with Rain, I did find recovery, and my delivery story is a nonstop horror show, but I did retain custody of her the whole time and had sustained sobriety, like right after I had her. And then about a year and a half after I had her, I fell back into fairly chaotic use, but it never looked like what it did when I was in my teens and homeless and engaged in survival sex work and just all the things.
And to what do you attribute the ability to manage it better after having Rain?
And literally, Rain, I never wanted to lose her. I was under the threat of losing her all the time. And so the thought of not having her, I knew that if I ever lost her, I would die. And so that always helped me course correct.
And did you have healthcare providers during the delivery or after that were caring for you, that were caring for Rain, who were supportive and helpful?
No, I really didn't. Before I had her, I broke up with her father for a multitude of reasons. And so I was once again homeless, and you can't leave the hospital with your baby if you are homeless. And they literally kept sending, and I was very sick throughout this pregnancy. And I did manage to stop using all substances during this pregnancy, because I wanted her to be so healthy. And I always wanted a girl. I was so happy she was a girl. But I did find like absolute abstinent recovery during this pregnancy, which for me is wild. But they kept sending people into my room telling me I needed to give her up for adoption. Like, they literally, she did end up having to go to the NICU because I delivered early. And they separated us, of course, because she went up to NICU, and they came in with papers and they're like, we have families, you don't have a house to go to. And I had contacted my mother for some reason when I was pregnant, because I don't know why, but I did. And that was the first time I had spoken to her in several years. And she showed up under the influence and got kicked out of the hospital. And it was definitely an ordeal. And especially after that, they're like, you are in a cycle and you are going to put this cycle on this innocent baby. And we have families and big, beautiful homes, and she'll go to college and have a good life.
Wow, that's a lot of pressure.
Oh, I was sobbing. Like, I can't tell you. I remember they like had the paperwork and I was like crying, trying to decide what was best for her.
So what ultimately happened since you were houseless at that time? How did you get out of there with Rain?
I discharged back to my partner, and that was not a good place, but I did agree to go back to that house
As a way of keeping her.
as a way of keeping her.
What did you need during that time? What would have made the difference in your ability to regularly access care and your ability to be healthy and tend to her health?
I needed support, and I needed someone to see me as a whole and not just a drug user. I was a young girl. I was a traumatized young girl. And like I said, there was the one counselor at the Pregnancy Crisis Center, and I think she saw me as a whole, and that made so much difference. But if my medical providers could have seen me as a whole and not just a substance user, not just a heroin user, and offered me support, everything was recovery based. There wasn't a lot of housing navigation. There was no social support. There was no like psychological support. There was nothing other than don't do drugs, don't do drugs, don't do drugs, give up your baby, don't do drugs, you need to give up your baby.
So some of this is a systems issue in terms of what support is available. Is there any housing? And some of it is a matter of their sort of rote response when they see somebody who uses drugs is to not see their full humanity, not see possibility, and not connect them to supports that would enable them to be healthy and to be housed and to keep their baby.
Yes. Putting me in, I don't know, I needed support. I needed community, because I think that's something that society by large fails to see, that people who use drugs, we have a very supportive community, and it might not look like traditional support, but I would not be here today if not for a community of people who use drugs, who supported and cared for me through my active use.
100%. That was another thing I was wondering about. Would it have made a difference if your supports from your community were involved, were welcomed, invited, and involved in your care?
No, absolutely it would have, because everybody's scared to go to the doctor when you're in active use. And I think that medical professionals, providers really need to realize how scary it is to walk in, because we know you're going to see us as drug users, and we know you're going to focus on that, right? It doesn't matter what other health issues we have going on. I'm pregnant. I now work with participants who have serious medical issues going on, and it always goes to drug use. And I'm like, this is not related to drug use.
And that's really the way that we change minds. And that's, I think, what these healthcare providers need to seek out is actually engaging with drug users and people who work with drug users in these sorts of scenarios and in
Yeah.
more outreach, active drug use, homeless encampment situations, so that they can meet people, see them as human beings, hear what their experiences are, and what they need when they present at the ED.
Absolutely.
We're doing great work. That I got through all of my questions. Is there anything else that feels important for you to communicate to healthcare providers as they listen to your story today, and as they then spend time together reflecting on this and in terms of, what they should and should not do?
I know it's hard for healthcare providers because I now train healthcare providers. I do have nursing background now, so maybe that's important to note as well.
Yes.
But I think particularly when it comes to women who use drugs, we are more vilified, and probably because we're people that are capable of parenting, or we're the ones likely to get pregnant and have children. I think that particularly pregnant women are really demonized, and there's this narrative, oh, you don't care about your baby. You don't care about your baby. You're selfish. I got told I was selfish by a lot of people, and I was trying so hard. But I was trying so hard, and literally trying so hard. I'd never tried so hard, and nobody recognized that. They just saw me as a failure and selfish because I couldn't stop using drugs. But I was on a journey to stopping using and reducing my use. And like I said, I did eventually stop using all the way, but I think if I could have had support, a little bit of encouragement, like, you're doing great, you stopped using Coke, I think that would have made a world of difference. But it was never about my wins. It was only about how I was messing up. And to say that women are selfish or don't love my baby or don't love their babies as they're trying to have a healthy pregnancy, even in spite of their drug use, I think we all need to stop that and encourage and support these women.
Thank you so much again, Valery and Kshe, for that powerful conversation. Now to my listeners, as you reflect on Kshe's story, please consider, how does stigma impact the willingness of pregnant people with SUD to seek medical care? What assumptions might you hold, whether they're consciously or unconsciously, about people who use drugs while pregnant? How can you further integrate trauma-informed, compassionate care into your practice? This series was developed by IPMA and CAFP through the CORE partnership, supported by an independent educational grant from the opioid analgesics REMS program companies. If you're looking for more resources on OUD and substance use disorders, check the show notes at familydocs.org/podcast or visit CAFP's SUD webpage at familydocs.org/SUD. This is our third series focusing on family docs and opioid use disorder. If you missed our other series, you're really missing out. Find them today in your podcast player by viewing all Family Docs podcast episodes. If you enjoy our show, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, and be sure to come back next time for our next conversation. Until then, this is your favorite family physician, Dr. Rob Asibe. This podcast was created, produced, and recorded by the California Academy of Family Physicians. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent or the California Academy of Family Physicians.